welcome on into Book Passage Live. It's nice to see some bright and smiling faces here today. My name is Nick, and it's very, very nice to see you all. Welcome to Conversations with Authors. Today we bring to you our Native Heritage Tribute event, a part of a series of events that we run at Book Passage through all sorts of things. But as this month is Native Heritage Month, we're very happy to bring this to you. But before we get to all of our speakers and to our moderator properly, allow me to welcome you to Book Passage's Conversations with Authors series. If you've seen one of these events before, then welcome back. We're glad to see you again. But if you're new here, then Book Passage is a group of independently run bookstores out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And we host and run book talks and panels and tribute events just like these almost every day out of the week, whether they are in person in our stores, both in San Francisco and Corte Madera, or online here at youtube.com. As we will continue streaming on YouTube, including these panel events or events like these, and we will continue to do them in the future. Please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button just below the video. It's completely free to you. It really helps us out. And also, if you click the bell right next to the subscribe button, it allows you to know every single time we go live with author events, whether they are pre-recorded or, just like these, live. We really appreciate it. If you would like to check out our upcoming events, or just like the idea of receiving an email newsletter from us, you can find both of those at bookpassage.com. And if you'd like to check out any of our speakers' books tonight, or anything that gets mentioned here, you can find all of them at bookpassage.com just by searching in the search bar just below the banner on our homepage. Lastly, there will be no questions tonight. I know many of you are excited for it. Well, actually, Paula, are there questions tonight?
No, not tonight.
No.
Sorry.
No, absolutely. I probably should have checked that ahead of time. There will be no questions tonight. I know.
Comments. Yeah.
Sure. I'm sure a lot of you are very used to it, but just due to the way that this thing is set up tonight, it would probably be pretty tough to ask questions. So there will be none tonight. So have a good time watching. Now, allow me to introduce our moderator tonight, Paula Farmer. Book Passage's very own. In addition to curating events for social discourse and change, just like this one, Paula features as a featured writer, the host of the Speaking Of interview series on Instagram, in which she regularly talks with BIPOC authors, artists, and activists on topical issues. She's the chairperson of the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee of CALIBA. And recently selected for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the American Booksellers Association. We're very, very excited to have all of you here tonight. Now, let me get off the screen and hand you over to Paula.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Nick, for that lovely introduction and opening things up for us. And thanks to all of you who are joining us live, or even if you're joining us later on, because as always, we do put all our presentations on our YouTube channel that you can see at any time. I'm so proud to have been involved in organizing this particular program, and certainly to host these special writers. And most of all, it's such an honor to honor the first. As such, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. As such, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement of whose land we stand on. This is simply a statement that reminds us about the history and presence of Indigenous peoples and the ties to their land. Book Passage stands on the traditional lands of the Coast Miwok people who have inhabited Marin and Sonoma areas for more than 13,000 years. Having survived cultural genocide by the Spanish and English, the Coast Miwok people are working to reclaim their past by sharing their history. November, as many of you know, or maybe you didn't, is National Native American Heritage Month. Exactly 1 week from today, as we all know, is Thanksgiving. But for many Indigenous peoples, it is referred to as a National Day of Mourning. We will get into what that means later. As Native Heritage Month, we should all celebrate those of Indigenous heritage, embrace the cultures they embody, and educate the public about tribal communities. We should also be honest about history, the ugly and unfortunate, as well as the celebratory. For its part, Book Passage is honoring the history and culture of Indigenous peoples in the way we do both best, with a special book-related event, which we're having right now, featuring authors, poets, and activists, and a discussion, which is why we are here tonight. This is actually the second part of a two-part event. The first part has actually been up for a while. It's on a specially designated website that's on the Book Passage website at bookpassage.com /native 2021. And you can see a lot of the writing, the essays and the poems that are being presented tonight, and that some that aren't even going to be presented tonight. So please feel free to avail yourself to that website page. It'll be up for the whole month of November. What is next? So we do have a great lineup of poets and authors and Book Passage staff, also book industry specialists. But the first of tonight's presentation is by former San Francisco Poet Laureate, Kim Shuck. She is also a weaver and a beadwork artist, and who draws from Southeastern Native American culture and tradition, as well as contemporary urban Indian life. She was born in San Francisco and belongs to the Northern California Cherokee diaspora. Thank you for joining us, Kim, and take it away.
You Are Lost, a Flotilla of Myth, an essay that will be published in a book of essays by me, by Andover Street Press, probably next year. I raised 3 mixed-race Cherokee Polish kids in San Francisco, my kids. As much as I love and respect teachers in this beautiful, variegated city, I have to say that certain times of the year and their lesson plans repeatedly snuck up on me, leaving behind a haze of frustration. There's a time of the year that I like to call the silly season. The beginning of the silly season is marked by Lost Italian Day on October 12th and continues until Gluttony Day in the last week of November. It's a time marked by images of chubby little scantily clad brown people wearing a feather, a headband, and braids. Some of the little brown people wear more clothing, some have more feathers, hair length can vary. When I was a child and this season would roll around, I would frown and compare these people to my father, sometimes at the dinner table. I would compare them to my grandparents, my aunt, uncle, cousins, other people I met who I knew to be like us. I know that Cherokee falls within the false category of Indian, and I had been told that these little brown people were meant to represent us, but I could never quite see it. As a child, I would comment or not. If I did, I was often told by non-family members that I wasn't really Indian, which is technically true, but I am Cherokee, and as I've mentioned, that's what we're called. My dad worked in telecommunications, and when I was a kid, never wore feathers to work. In my memory, he either wore his Navy uniform or a business suit. I think my fug of confusion started then. My kids were taught some of the same material I was. In 1492, met on the beach, brought medicine, ownership of property, rational thought, linked the hemispheres of the globe, and now we all must applaud. I imagine this meeting in a really different way, a way that describes men who'd been eating bug-infested hardtack, were somewhat chewed by the insects themselves, likely suffering malnutrition, and oh yes, very, very lost. Once a year, each child would bounce cheerfully up to where I was, waiting to pick them up from class, carrying a handmade Spanish flag, some requisite little brown cutouts, more than once, a small construction paper ship with the word Nina printed carefully towards the prow. Now, I'm not anti-construction paper. I like ships. I've never quite figured out why we wound up with so many Ninas, but it may be because the father of my children has a name that begins with a D, and that they're therefore in the first third of the alphabet. Perhaps more mysterious was the lone Santa Maria holding down the last third, all on its own. The first year my oldest met me with his ship held proudly in front of him, I can only hope that I didn't actually say what I was thinking. My childhood came rushing back, and I have to confess that I was surprised at how upset it made me. Reviews of my parenting vary, sometimes dramatically, but rather than have my own breakdown with or without commentary, I took my son home, got out a globe, and showed him that India and Watling Island aren't even close to each other. If I, for example, attempt to take a trip to Japan and end up in France, I have failed, even if I find a good bakery and interesting architecture, and I'm unlikely to get a holiday named after me in the process. At various points, I offered to teachers reading material in a range of age-appropriate forms. I offered to come speak to classes as a then university lecturer. Oh, what was my subject? Right, Native American Studies. I offered humor, accurate history, handouts, for the most part not accepted. I never expected anyone to change the history books. They reprint them year after year without alteration. As a writer, I know how tricky it is to change glossaries and tables of contents. It's fiddly work, and no one I know enjoys that part of publishing. I suppose I did hope for a small window of acknowledgement that there are differing versions of the Columbus story. Once, and sometimes a person must draw a line, a teacher had the students construct native clothing out of crumpled paper sacks and enacted what I can only describe as a red-faced minstrel show. That year I did complain. I wrote letters, enlisted other Indigenous people to make noise with me, but generally mythology is a stubborn thing, and it's difficult to shift. We don't have to start with whole slavery, biohazard, mutilation, and dare I say entitlement part of the Columbus story, but just maybe we could notice the part where he didn't land in India. One year, I believe it was my daughter this time, surprised me with another Nina, and I knew that I said not again. She wasn't offended because by this time all three kids were well aware of my love-hate relationship with harvest season. I love pumpkins, dressing up, long orange days, and apple crumble. Not so happy with most of the holidays. Another parent at the school heard me and asked when my people would just get over it. You don't hear that very often in San Francisco, and I was almost impressed. I considered offering that parent a reading list or maybe a witty quip. I can't remember what I did. Until the schools start teaching the material in a more sensitive way, nothing I can say will have any useful effect. We took the ship home, united it with its sister Nina's and the lone Santa Maria. We filled the turtle-shaped wading pool in the backyard with water, and we launched our little flotilla. Gradually, the color drained brown into the water as each ship individually sank and then came to pieces. I think it made us all feel much better. I know that it worked for me.
Thank you for that, Kim. That was inspiring and wonderful and so informative. Also, thank you, Kim, for introducing me to so many of tonight's presenters. Next, please welcome the former Kansas Poet Laureate and the author of 12 books of poetry, and she too is of Cherokee heritage. Denise Lowe joins us.
Hi, my name is Denise Lowe. I'm a writer of Lenape-Muncie, also known as Delaware descent, not enrolled. After living across the river from former Lenape lands in Kansas for most of my life, I have moved to California and live as an uninvited guest in Sonoma County on traditional lands of Coast Miwok, Pomo, Wapo, and Wintu people. I celebrate and acknowledge the 8 Pomo and Miwok bands of Sonoma County and grieve especially the situation of the Cloverdale Pomo, who lost their lands in 1994 to the California Department of Transportation for a Highway 101 bypass. Decimation of tribal nations through doctrine of discovery practices continues in present times. This is a sincere land acknowledgement, one way I can respect the indigenous people who lived and now live on this land. I hope you will consider this practice formally or informally. Another way I celebrate the Indigenous peoples is to acknowledge the success of over 500 federally recognized tribal groups and many more state and locally recognized groups, not organizations of fake Indigenous tribes. Through sacrifice, courage, community loyalty, and cultural knowledge, these tribal groups have survived over 500 years of contact. This is a remarkable record worthy of celebration. Another celebration is remembrance of Yuki and Filipino writer William Wandazan of the Round Valley Indian tribes in Mendocino County. This is the nation that is in negotiations now with the University of California, Hastings College for restorative justice to change the name of the college from that of the founder, Serranos Hastings, who committed genocidal acts against Indigenous Californians in the Round and Eden Valleys. William Wandazan, born in 1947, founded the first literary journal devoted to the works of Indigenous American writers in 1976. He published 8 chapbooks and books of poetry. He edited the American Indian Culture and Research Journal at UCLA. He taught at Occidental College as a visiting professor, and I engaged him to visit Haskell Indian Nations University, where I taught in the late 1980s. We stayed in touch until his death. My former student, Patrick Naranjo, now executive director of the UC Berkeley American Indian Graduate Program, helped edit my letters and papers related to Wandazan, which are housed now in the Sequoia National Research Center in Little Rock. Here is a poem by William Wandazan. Grandmother's Land. Around the house stood an orchard of plum, apple, and pear, a black walnut tree, one white pine, groves of white oak and willow clumps. The home of Jessie was largely redwood. Blood, flesh, and bones sprouted inside her womb of redwood for 5 generations. The trees now stand unpruned and wild. After relocating so many years before the war, the seeds of Jessie have returned. Afternoon sunlight on the field, breezes moving grass and leaves, memories with family names wait within the earth, the mountains, the valley, the fields, the trees. That was Grandmother's Land from Round Valley Songs by William Wandazan. And I have a poem that uses one of his short poems within it to celebrate his career as a poet. It's called Ember. A fugitive print on the table, perforated, detached, untitled. It says, long ago, black bears sang around our lodge fires. This is a half-life we share, build, sketched, maps to Round Valley. You wrote, tonight they dance alive through our dreams. Royals of Neosho currents, blue roans against hills. These are words you set loose in my ears, words you left in sheaves. Papers flame in my hands. I see you in the fire's heart, a coral glow image, and what you knew, what you dove into. And I'd like to close out with a poem celebrating the land. And I acknowledge the great work of Andy Gertie and Maura Garcia, who taught me some Cherokee. All mistakes are my own. This poem is called Long Man, Cherokee word for river. Latin riparia, ground torn open by water. Biblical, riverbank gathering place. Old French, Riviere, Northern Pomo, Xabeda, Cherokee, Equoni, person, long, male. Trace my water bottle swig backwards to the faucet, to underground pipes, city pumping stations, and upstream to Rio Lindo, to Shabakai in Pomo, Long Snake. The bean whose sidewinds Fitch Mountain, a curlicue loop. Mist is its breath. Rainwater in our metal gutters gurgle and flow downslope, streams of tears to what the songs call Old Man River. Cherokee and Latin put together, and Pomo, a benevolent long snake of life traveling through droughts and floods. On the bridge over a nameless creek, see swallows, blackberry bramble, arrowroot. In the shallows, quivers of underwater fins, ripples, water, more water on the move. Thank you for spending time today with me. My name is Denise Lowe, and thank you again.
Wow, thank you so much, Denise. Very generous of you. We really appreciate it. Next up, David Heska Wyden is the author of a debut thriller from 2020 called Winter Counts. One of my personal favorite books that I read this year, and I highly recommend. His work has appeared also in Yellow Medicine Review, and he is the recipient of many awards. Please welcome David Wyden.
Hello, I'm David Heska Wyden, and I'm really happy to read you a very short excerpt today from Winter Counts, my novel, which was released in 2020 from Echo Press. In this excerpt, I'm going to read just a very short passage where Virgil Wounded Horse, the hero of the book, is waiting in the hospital room to find out if his nephew Nathan is going to live or die after an overdose. So here is a very brief passage from Winter Counts. Hours passed while I waited for Nathan to wake up. I tried to stop my mind from going to dark places, but images of my nephew as brain damaged crowded into my head. I was proud of him, his intelligence and his curiosity, and his fierce defense of music I hated. It was breaking my heart and my spirit to imagine that these parts of him might be gone for good. And then I started to obsess over things Nathan had done that might have tipped me off to hard drug use. Had he been acting strangely? Maybe I should have searched his backpack and his phone. I gave up trying to stop this parade of images, and I just sat with my fear and my guilt. The windows in the hospital room were murky, like they hadn't been washed in years, but I could still glimpse the russet hills and rolling prairie of the reservation outside in the dying light. Back in the time before Columbus, there were only Indians here, no skyscrapers, no automobiles, no streets. Of course, we didn't use the words Indian or Native American then. We were just people. We didn't know that we were supposedly drunks or lazy or savages. I wondered what it was like to live without that weight on your shoulders, the weight of the murdered ancestors, the stolen land, the abused children, the burden every Native person carries. We were told in movies and books that Indians had a sacred relationship with the land, that we worshipped and nurtured it. But staring at Nathan, I didn't feel any mystical bond with the res. I hated our shitty unpaved roads and our falling down houses and the snarling packs of dogs that roamed freely in the streets and alleys. But most of all, I hated that kids like Nathan, good kids, decent kids, got involved with drugs and crime and gangs because there was nothing for them to do here. No after-school jobs, no clubs, no tennis lessons. Every month in the Lakota Times newspaper, there was an obituary for another teen suicide, another family in the Burn Thigh Nation who'd had their heart taken away from them. In the old days, the Ayapaha was the town crier, the person who would meet incoming warriors after a battle, ask them what happened so they wouldn't have to speak of their own glories, and then tell the people the news. Now, the Ayapaha, our local newspaper, announced losses and harms too often, victories and triumphs too rarely. So why didn't I leave? People here always talked about going to Rapid City or Sioux Falls or Denver, getting a job and making a clean break, putting aside native ways and assimilating, adapting to suburban life. But I thought about the sound of the drummers at a powwow, the smell of wild sage, the way little native kids looked dressed up in their first regalia, the flash of the sun coming up over the hills. I wondered if I could ever really leave the reservation, because the res was in my mind, a virtual res, one I was seemingly stuck with. And then I fell into a half sleep, immersed in fugue dreams and transient thoughts, images of Indian children dancing in my head.
Much appreciated, David. No rush, but we are looking forward to your next book. Georgina Marie had her first book of poetry published in 2018, so not that long ago. But in that short time, she has already made a name for herself. She is the literary coordinator and poetry coordinator and poetry out loud coordinator for the Lake County Arts Council. She has served as co-editor for the Middletown Art Center's Resilience and Restore collections of written word and visual arts funded by the California Arts Council. She is the current Lake County Poet Laureate through next year. So please welcome to the Book Passage stage, Georgina Marie.
Open palm. I would give up shame, bottled like IPA de la Rosa, sealed and sold at a small town brewery. Memories, broken men who tried to make me match their cracks, like cement crevices as a child I used to jump over, never once thinking they'd actually break my mother's back. Wilted marigolds and recycled honey jars, when they're no longer supple and vibrant, though I may dry them out in vintage books, never actually letting go of the life of those lively botanicals. Ghosts, shadow smoke I used to witness as a young girl in the family home. Forbidden walls that held all the darkest secrets, those skeletons, muertos en el armario, dead in the closet. Take it all from my open palm. On the other hand, valley oaks revive me each morning, their sage and rust hues painting themselves now that autumn has returned. They breathe into me, speaking in psalms, reciting verses of wind and repentance. Not an oak nor a crabapple feels shame. Don't see my shame. If a tree forgives you in the blue of dawn, does anyone hear it? This must stay, all of it. Thank you.
That was really fantastic, and we really appreciate it, Georgina. Our next presenter is making sure that Native children see themselves represented in stories and books, and non-Native kids should take advantage of that as well. She's doing that because she is actually a children's writer and a children's book illustrator. Maddie Goodnight joins us now to explain about the significance of Native Heritage Month.
Hi, my name is Maddie Goodnight, and I'm a Native American illustrator and writer living in Oklahoma, and Book Passage reached out to me to share some thoughts about Native American Heritage Month. I've had the great fortune of working with Indigenous and non-Indigenous writers in my career, and I've got 2 books out, The Pear Tree by Louie Gray and Look Grandma Neolisi by Art Colson, and I have Powwow Day by Tracy Sorel coming out in February. This month is so important to me. It's one of my favorite months because it's Native American Heritage Month, and I think it's a great time for us all to reflect and learn more and give great shout outs to Native American creators and writers. Storytelling has always been important to me ever since I was a young girl. My mom always made sure to have children's books that had Native American and Indigenous voices that I could read through and be inspired by and aspire to, and that greatly affected me as I grew older and grew into my career. I think as I got into children's publishing, I became more aware of how small the stage for Native American and Indigenous voices is currently. I think that as a writer and an illustrator, I've made a real effort so far in my career to expand that and to shine light on Native American history and culture and give more of a voice to Native American children and people just in the US. I think it's really important for us all, especially this month, to stop and kind of reflect on Native American history and culture. I think if you're parents, it would be an amazing thing this month to teach your kids about Native American history, Indigenous culture, and stories. There's a ton of great books and writers that you can support on social media. You can buy books, go to galleries, museums. If you're a little far away, you can always look up online somewhere that you could travel to, or you could, order children's books online and support small businesses or small bookstores, which I personally love, and some of the local artists in your area or further away. I think that would be a really great way to further your understanding of Native American history and culture during Native American Heritage Month, and also just, stop and reflect on the history behind Thanksgiving and the start of kind of this country and, some of the things that have happened in the past, and just pay respect to different cultures during this time of year. Speaking of great Indigenous voices, I had the pleasure of working with Tracy Sorel, who is a wonderful Native American writer. Powwow Day really spoke to me because it marries together all of the great cornerstones of Native American culture, which is family, community, support, love, all in a beautiful story that has a young Native American girl as the protagonist and showcases traditional dress and dances and just allows people to have a little window into Native American culture. I think it'd be a great book for people to check out, to read to their children around this time of year, but also it might be a good lead into other books. Tracy has done a million great books, so she's just amazing to check out. And I think if that's something that people would be interested in, I think it would be really wonderful to share some time with your children and reflect on this time of year and Native American heritage and be together for the holidays. So I want to thank Book Passage so much for asking me to do this video. I've had so much fun talking about what this month means to me and how excited I am this time of year, every year. And I hope that everyone can just take some time to reflect and learn something new, and have a great day.
Thank you, Maddie. We really appreciate you reminding us of the significance of this month and also the importance of representation in children's books. Our next presenter is not only one of my favorite colleagues as the buying director for Book Passage, but you're going to recognize her because she's a regular host. She's one of our best hosts on these virtual events. And please help me welcome Louisa Smith.
Hi, I'm Louisa Smith, and I'm the buying director for Book Passage. And you may be wondering why I am part of this incredible event tonight. And that is because I'm also the daughter of Martin Cruz Smith, the author of Gorky Park, Polar Star, Red Square, Stallion Gate, Rose, Havana Bay, Siberian Dilemma, and The Girl from Venice. While you may know him as a suspense novelist, you may not have heard that he is also a Native author. Back when my father started writing in the 70s, you could be a Native American author, or you could be a suspense novelist or a genre writer. You couldn't really be both. At least it wasn't acknowledged. His first two books actually were The Indians Won, which you may not have heard of. You see, it's a mass market original, sort of alternative history where the Indians actually did win and end up with a nuclear weapon. And then Nightwing, which came right before Gorky Park. And here he is on the back here, being very handsome. But once Gorky Park hit, him being a suspense novelist just eclipsed everything else. And so for years now, most people don't realize that he is a Native American writer. Tonight, I'm going to read something for you that is something he's just started working on. And it's the most personal thing, well, in terms of fiction, that I've ever seen him write. It is very brief so far because he really did just start it. And it opens with a woman who is very much like his mother. Her name is even Louisa Duran, like his mom. And she is a lounge singer. And my grandmother was also a lounge singer who was billed as the Indian princess, to my father and his brother and sisters' complete embarrassment. But she was a beautiful woman, an incredible singer, and obviously a huge impact on her life and his crazy dad, John. But after the initial introduction there, things take a turn to the fiction, as always does with my dad. And I hope you will really enjoy this short little piece. And I think it's incredibly appropriate for tonight. I do want to say thank you for being here before I read this. And thank you to all the incredible authors that are here tonight. Really so proud to be part of this. And thank you for letting me read for my father tonight. My mother was the most beautiful woman in the world. Her name was Louisa Duran, and she had black hair, luminous eyes, and a smile that seemed to float on air. She wore a white deerskin dress, and customers fell silent as she sang a ballad. If she tried to sing country and western, the audience booed. They only wanted to hear love songs from the Indian princess. My father was called John, and he was a show all to himself. He wore a buckskin shirt that had feathers sewn onto his long sleeves, and he was a fancy dancer, which meant that while other Indians pounded a four-man drum, he whirled in circles, extending his arms like eagle wings. As for me, my name is Jake. I handled rattlesnakes, diamondbacks, stem winders at the summer fair. I held a stick with a hook on the end to keep them off balance, and sometimes I could hold 2 or 3 in my hands, but never more. The snakes crawled over each other in a small pit. While the Hopi prayed for water and beat their drums behind me, I picked up a rattler with my rod in my right hand and grasped the snake behind his head with my left. I danced in a circle with the snake slipping to the double S and returned to the pit for another. Again, I transferred the snake to my left hand and danced as the 2 snakes swirled together. Picking up a third was tricky business because I had to pick up the snake with the rod in my right, and then drop the rod and catch the snake behind his head at the same time. The audience sucked in their breath. Holding 2 snakes in one hand and one in the other, I raised my arms and danced in a circle. Once, 2 diamondbacks escaped, and I rushed to gather them up. The trouble was they sped in 2 different directions. I caught the tail of one, but had to return it to the pit, and by then the other was long gone. The audience knew it. They ran. Nothing left for me to do but head for Albuquerque. So I walked to the road and put out my thumb, hoping for a ride in that direction. I hope you enjoyed that, and looking forward to you being able to read more of this story from my father and to see you hopefully at the store, picking up books by other Native authors. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Louisa, I so appreciate that you did not hesitate when I enlisted you to be part of this program tonight, and you added so much to it. Thank you for speaking on behalf of your father, and we look forward to reading the entirety of what he's working on now. Speaking of books and favorite people, next up is one of my favorite book people. I'm so happy to have Calvin Crosby, who is a former longtime Book Passage employee, a more recent former executive director of the California Independent Booksellers Association, CALIBA, and is a new co-owner, new and current co-owner of the King's English Bookstore in Salt Lake City. We're going to have a brief talk about a couple of issues to Native community, as well as go through a list of books from Native authors that we highly recommend. Calvin, thank you for joining me.
Well, Louisa's a hard act to follow, as always.
I put it in that order on purpose. She is. No, you'll do fine. You'll do fine. Really appreciate you doing this. And by the way, Calvin is live. This is a live, brief conversation between us. Why don't we get into our book recommendations? And obviously, you're the guest here. I'm going to defer to you to start.
Okay, I'm going to start out gentle, and then we'll go from there.
All right.
First book I want to talk about is Notable Native People, 50 Indigenous Leaders, Dreamers, and Changemakers from Past to Present. Not only, like, this is the book I would have died to have as a kid, to show me, my people. You know, as much as I love Ramona the Pest, we don't have a lot in common. Illustrations in this are gorgeous, and the essays are on par with that. This is an incredible book. It's incredibly inclusive. Let's see.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. And it is by Adrienne King. Then also, I'm going to tell you about Borders. The story is by Thomas King, which I think most of us have read some of his work. The art is by Natasha Donovan, and it's a graphic novel. What's really incredible about this is a mother is going to visit her daughter. Her daughter left home at 17 and moved to all places, Salt Lake City, Utah. So they begin a reconciliation, and the daughter invites the mother and her younger brother to come visit her in Salt Lake. So the mother and the brother get to the border, the Canadian-US border, and they ask her whether she's Canadian or from the United States. And her answer is, I'm Blackfoot. And she will not bend. She will not concede. And so there's multiple attempts for her to get over the border and holding her place, holding her space and her identity. Spoiler alert, she does get over, but I won't tell you how.
Thanks.
Do you have time for one more?
Yes, please.
One? Okay. So this is Walking into...
I have a really big list. Go for it.
I know, there's so many, and I pared it down. Walking in Two Worlds. This is set in the near future. We've just had our 5th or 6th pandemic. I can't remember now. But meeting in person is less and less an option. And even school has this VR kind of piece to it, so you can create your avatar. So beyond the lead character's Ojibwe, there's also like body identity as well as race identity and a great deal of bullying. But the lead character creates a VR world that is an homage or maybe even the embodiment of the spirit world with all the mythological creatures from the Ojibwe. And it has the intensity of a rapid fire video game, but also the beauty of the spirit world.
That's great.
Your turn?
Yeah. Yeah, so I have a list. I went a little long, but I'll make mine short. Thank you. No, but that's okay. So my first one is kind of referencing one of our guests, although I do recommend everybody's book. That's partly why I invited them to be part of this program. But definitely David Wyden's book, Winter Counts, especially if you're a mystery fan. This is combining literary fiction with suspense and mystery, and really fantastic, especially when you consider that he is a debut novelist. And also I'm in the midst of reading The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, which I think is a favorite of yours as well.
Absolutely. I just finished it and loved it.
Oh my gosh, I love the humor. She just kind of brings together humor, a ghost story that's humorous, but also obviously very serious issues. And I love that it takes place in an independent bookstore.
Her bookstore, Birch
right?
Books and Native Arts, yeah. And it's a magical place. It's a magical place.
Ooh, good to know. Someplace I want to visit. Another one I want to mention is, I won't show it to, well, I will. I don't know if you can see that cover. It's called An Afro-Indigenous History of the United States by Kyle Mays. And it's dense, but very engaging and so worthwhile, talking about mixed ethnicities of Blacks that also have Indigenous heritage, and just how in some ways that can be problematic and is something to be proud of. And he just kind of delves into all the issues that's kind of layered within that. Excellent nonfiction writer. I also love Alotsoe by a friend of both of ours, Darcy Little Badger. This is a YA book. There's not a whole lot of illustrations, but at the beginning of each chapter, there is like pencil drawings, and they're beautiful. And she combines magical realism. I highly recommend that. And especially now, while it's still actually hardbound, I think it makes a great gift. I want to give a shout out for Postcolonial Love Poems by Natalie Diaz. I've been listening to it, and I just keep listening to it over and over. I love it. And last but not least for me is New Native Kitchen by Chef Freddie Bitsoe. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Now it's one of those cookbooks, wouldn't you say, Calvin, where it's not just recipes and pictures, which are gorgeous, but it's also very interesting stories, especially at the beginning.
100%. For me, any cookbook that has good essay is kind of my sweet spot. What I also like is that the ingredients are not intimidating.
No.
There's, like some of it's new, like maybe a new way to use some of these things that we've taken for granted, but it's a gorgeous, easy to follow cookbook with great essay. I agree.
Yeah, I'm glad it was on both our lists. Yay. So now for something that's probably going to be a little bit harder to hear, but I think important. I wanted us to touch on for just a few minutes, kind of the complexity of the upcoming holiday in light of Indigenous peoples and Native communities. And I know people usually just think of it in terms of Thanksgiving from the pilgrim's perspective and having turkey and getting together with friends and family, which is fine. But there's this whole other side to it that I think people have a responsibility to hear and know and share. And just before we talk, I wanted to read a little bit from Tommy Orange, who's an author of the novel They're There, which I thought that was going to be on your list.
I shifted things around. I figured that we're going to go a little more intense, so I started light.
Right. Yeah. So Tommy Orange did an op-ed for the LA Times in 2017, about a year before his book There came out and took the publishing world by storm. And it's entitled, Thanksgiving is a Tradition, It's Also a Lie. And I just want to read a little bit. And yes, I'm reading off of notes, people, I realize that. There was one meal in 1621. In 1622, the Indian Wars began. Native people were systematically erased through genocidal policy. The Indian Wars ended in 1924, but again, they just went cold because as soon as they ended, the Indian termination era began. Those battles were won by passing legislation that made it harder for us to stay visible, to thrive as a people, to stay alive. This November, most Americans will sit down with their families and eat a Thanksgiving meal. Some still will be recovering from the night before, which is known as Blackout Wednesday. Others will have their children tell the story about the Indians and the Pilgrims, and plenty of people will feel genuine gratitude. Most won't think about the history of the meal before, during, or after digesting their turkey. So to that, Calvin, I'd like to open up to you because you are Native, and just kind of how has that been for you to navigate Thanksgiving as a colonized white tradition that we have such affection for on one hand, but for many others, it's known as the Day of Mourning.
A Day of Mourning is, so for me personally, I grew up as a kid, we had the traditional Thanksgiving. For me as an adult, that never seemed authentic. So we turned it into a day of gratitude. And it wasn't about Pilgrims or Indians. It was about what are we thankful for in general. And even if you came to one of my dinner parties, you had to talk about one thing that you were grateful for and also read a gratitude quote from someone. Now that I've come back to Utah, I've got the family thing and I've got the history, and I'm going to sneak these in. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. I read these two books back to back. I do not recommend reading them back to back. I do recommend everyone should read them.
Absolutely.
And I grew up loving American history as well. What broke in me with Roxanne's book is that it's all a lie. So, by now we know that there's the lie that is Thanksgiving. There's it's a celebration of mass genocide. It's the starting point of where the stolen land really escalated. But reconciling with the lies and the white supremacy and the scorch and destroy that our people have gone through to have a celebration of this romantic notion of two sets of people sitting down at a table with one killing the other. So it's a lot to unpack now.
Yeah, no, but I think it's important that we talk about these things and be honest. And I honestly think if people, are going to have a traditional meal, which most probably participating tonight, watching this will, maybe just think about the real story. Maybe share it. It's been considered officially Day of Mourning for Indigenous peoples for about 50 years now. So it's time that it's part of the story that we hear. It's part of what we talk about.
It absolutely should be something that is part of all the conversations. We have to start with America. The United States of America is stolen land built by stolen people and built on the graves of the indigenous people, the first people. And I don't know. I think it makes me angry that we have glossed this into a national holiday that's about gluttony and family drama and, and parade.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack there, a lot to think about. I do appreciate what Maddie was saying, though. She wasn't specifically talking about Thanksgiving, but about National Native Heritage Month, that, let this be a time where you can kind of embrace the culture, embrace and uplift Native culture, celebrate that, And then I like your new tradition of it's more about gratitude and being honest and discussing and uplifting that, as opposed to the fake history we've been told for so long.
Someone close to me calls it Thanksgiving. And I think that sums it up well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Calvin, for joining and for sharing your book recommendations and your insights onto next week's holiday. Now, if Nick is ready, I'd like to, before we officially close the program, I'd like to hear from one last poet who's been so graciously waiting to say her piece. And Linda Noel is going to join us now with one or two poems, I believe. And Linda, she shares thoughts on the demarcation of November as well. And just know that she's also an acclaimed writer and poet. And I'm so glad that she's agreed to be a part of this program and be the last voice of the panel.
Native American Heritage Month is an interesting concept in recognizing Native peoples and paying homage to a people who hold a unique place in America. It seems almost fitting that the month be November, in that Thanksgiving is one of the oldest and celebrated traditions, along with one of the most significant benchmarks in American history. The designation of November as Native Heritage Month is, for me, an act of defiance of the actual brutal acts that are the foundation of the Thanksgiving celebration. I have been asked many times in my life by all types of individuals what Thanksgiving meant to my family and I, and did we celebrate? Any response could be simple or complex, shallow or deep. That inquiry, for me, is part of Native American Heritage Month. Each year, school children, like I and my siblings did, learn and relearn about pilgrims, harvest, and even make paper-feathered headbands while dismissing the magnitude of which Native people were experiencing destruction and dislocation that would continue throughout the history of America. So, acknowledging Heritage Month, like Thanksgiving, has been to my family an act of defiance. Yes, mainstream America celebrates pilgrims, pumpkins, and cranberries. We celebrate survival. Survival under the most concentrated efforts to exterminate us. Yes, that is the word used in historical documents in dealing with the Native population. Yes, we have turkey. Yes, we have ham and mashed potatoes and many pies. We gather because the holiday allows us to do so, offering days off work and time to travel and gather. In the old way, my great-grandmother held a spring and fall gathering. This is tradition, to acknowledge the changing of the seasons, welcome and prepare for the coming months. My family viewed Thanksgiving as that gathering, as is also the old way. To be Native is to give and offer thanks routinely, thankful for what you have, even if it be very little, whether it is acorn harvest, firewood for warmth, healthy family, and this to be practiced daily, followed by seasonal tributes. To pray is to give thanks, thankful for this creation, thankful for this life. 4, to take life for granted is an act that cannot go without negative consequence. Native American Heritage Month is significant in that contribution of Native peoples is acknowledged and celebrated, along with recognizing the historical truths of the cost we have paid at the expense of America's growth. We have survived, we remain, and although Native American Heritage Month offers an opportunity for all to celebrate Natives, we are worthy of acknowledgement, recognition, and celebration every dawn. Shall we know each other as we are human beings, each day, every day, with each heartbeat held in motion with moon pull of sun, blood, and breath granted, each with simple, indecipherable vitality, with Earth's molten center of all of us, humanity, celebrated, acknowledged daily, each season, a song of thanks for sunrise, for survival, every man, each woman, human being.
Thank you, Linda. I think that was so appropriate given what Calvin and I were just talking about, to actually hear your voice on the matter as well. Really appreciate that. I heard a Native chef recently say that through food, healthy and natural foods, the Indigenous people can engage in recovery from historical trauma and promote Indigenous healing. I would add to that, through presentations like this, hearing from Native voices and stories, through books and honest discussions, no matter how difficult. Representation matters. Thank you to tonight's presenters and to you, the audience. Thank you for definitely supporting events like this and authors and poets like this. As Nick mentioned at the top of the show, we have everybody's book that was on today. We have their books available to purchase, and we encourage you to purchase from Book Passage or other independent local bookstores, especially Native independent bookstores are uplifted tonight as well. Please do support us. We appreciate your support. Until we see you for our next event, please stay healthy and safe, and thank you.